I don't know if Eli Drinkwitz and the coaches agree with me, but I think the Tigers should be finished at one important position of need.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball on a portal-heavy edition of Locked On Mizzou, possibly even including Missouri getting some replacements for some prominent players the last few seasons. By the way, Austin Simmons, it's now official, at least according to Pete Nakos over at On3, he is going to be a Missouri Tiger. Not exactly a shocking bit of news there, but we'll get more into the quarterback position where, well, frankly, the Tigers might not be done. But I'll tell you this, I think there's one position of need where I think Missouri should stand pat at this point. After landing Robert Woodyard Jr. from Auburn, who played an excellent ball game against the Tigers this season, by the way, Missouri able to pull one out down on the plains in Jordan Hare Stadium. Well, I think Eli Drinkwitz saw that footage of Robert Woodyard, watched the film back and thought, you know what, he'd look pretty good in black and gold, wouldn't he? And I'd have to agree. Posted 67 total tackles last season. According to Zach Blackerby, my guy over at Locked On Auburn, he said immediately after when this news broke, hey, Missouri got one heck of a solid player here. And to me, with Woodyard paired with Nick Rodriguez, Missouri has now solidified the linebacker position in my mind. With all that Missouri still has left to spend at key positions, to me, I think you got to be done at linebacker. You got to just roll the dice with Woodyard and Nick Rodriguez as your starters. And, well, if you need depth, I think you got to do it with guys who are already on the roster. I just think that would be the smartest way to play this. And, of course, with Missouri and virtually every other college football team playing a nickel-based defense with two linebackers these days, all the more reason to, I think, focus on other positions. And, of course, not only is Woodyard a really good player, Rodriguez in somewhat limited time last season. He played quite a bit, actually. It was really part of, I would say, a three-man rotation for sure by the end of the season, but obviously was a real bright spot in the Gator Bowl as well. So I just think a lot of reasons for hope there at that linebacker spot now. And obviously, well, the quarterback position is one place where you have to spend a ton of money. I don't suspect that Austin Simmons was at the top of the market there. Certainly the Brendan Sorsby young man from Cincinnati getting $5 million from the Texas Tech landman down in Lubbock. Well, he's not getting that kind of money, but certainly some significant money for Simmons. And obviously, I've pointed out online, there's just been a real cacophony of completely unsolicited by me support coming my way from Ole Miss fans. I mean, it's really been shocking. There hasn't been one negative comment yet. Now, does that mean Simmons is going to be great? No, it just means that Ole Miss fans really think highly of the young man and of him as a player as well. And take this for what it's worth. On November 1st, Lane Kiffin said, I think we have the best quarterback room in the country. I think Austin Simmons is a great quarterback, was playing really well for a first-time starter. And I think he'd be having a great year if he was still in there. I have all the confidence in the world in him. So I think that we have two that are better than a lot of people's ones. Well, obviously, if you're a Missouri fan right now, you got to hope Austin Simmons is better than Missouri's ones, including Bo Pribula this past season. Again, I will say this, interestingly, I'm not sure that Missouri is done at quarterback because as far as I can tell, Amari Odom, who the Kennesaw State quarterback who entered his name into the transfer portal, far as I can tell, he is still expected to visit the Tigers on Wednesday, along with reportedly Syracuse at some point as well. Now, with Missouri having Simmons, if Syracuse can tell Amari Odom, hey, you're likely going to be our starter here, I would think he would go there. At least that's what I would do if I were Amari Odom and didn't have obvious emotional attachments to the University of Missouri and we're just looking out for myself. I think that would be the obvious move there. But if Syracuse can't offer that and maybe they view him as a competitor for a starting job, maybe Amari Odom wants to come in and compete with Austin Simmons in the SEC. I think that would be really interesting, as Odom has a lot of interesting talent and skill in his own right. Does the former starting quarterback for the Conference USA champs last year. Now, speaking of positions that are very much still, positions of need for Missouri, you've got one cornerback in the fold now, for former Oregon Duck Jahlil Florence, who seems like a great opportunity for the Tigers. He really does. A very, very highly ranked player out of high school. And it's easy to see why. He's got excellent athleticism for a kid who's 6'1" and maybe even a little bit of a late bloomer in football, as he was very much a high-level basketball player as well. But he became he played immediately for the Ducks and then came on his sophomore season before missing, last season with an injury and some of 2023 as well. Seems like a great kid, though, at least according to Oregon coach Dan Lanning, who said, "I'm thrilled with Jahlil's contribution to our team. He was a positive teammate. I'm wishing him nothing but the best. He was looking for a reset, and I wish him a great future." And by the way, importantly, I think here for Jahlil Florence, he has 2 years of eligibility remaining. As I've pointed out before several times, obviously there's a difference between returning from injury and returning to full form. And sometimes it maybe takes that extra year. So obviously it's good that Missouri has that extra year. On the other hand, I think Florence is going to be a really important person for 2026. We need him to show up. And obviously if he's the first corner that Missouri has signed here, they prioritized him, and it really is easy to see why. He definitely fits the long, rangy, athletic types that Missouri likes to play at the position. And by the way, as I've pointed out, corner, linebacker, obviously important positions of need for Missouri. I think corner is much more so. They lost their top 3 corners on the team, did Missouri. So I think you're looking probably at least 2 more additions at the cornerback position, maybe even more than that, because Missouri literally only has a couple returning players at that spot in Cameron Keys, who's never really had any serious action, a guy that Brian Smith, my guy, the Scoutmaster who hosts the Portal on our network, He was a fan of his as a Florida observer from high school, but how much can you count on him at this point? I certainly can't say. And Nick DeLoach, another player who played quite a bit in 2024 as a young player, but not so much this year, was eventually recruited over in the portal, for example. So it's going to be interesting to see how this cornerback room plays out. And frankly, once again, this is a great example of why, in my opinion, if you're Missouri, you have so many spots defensively still that you have to fill from what was a great defense last year. I think at linebacker, you just got to roll the dice there with Woodyard and Rodriguez. And with Robert Woodyard Jr., it looks like Missouri has a replacement lined up for Josiah Trotter. But speaking of replacements, how about Marquis Johnson and Dalen Carnell, some players that could possibly be taking those roles next season? Let's talk about that here coming up in just a minute. But I got to tell you, does it get tough to manage your finances these days? Does it seem a little bit overwhelming with all the different accounts and credit cards and passwords, this, that, or the other? Well, would you believe I had multiple accounts for the same streaming service that I was paying for like 3 or 4 months, didn't even realize it? Well, this is where Rocket Money comes in, the personal finance app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That is rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Well, Missouri will be seeing Marquis Johnson again, one of our former wide receivers, of course, put his name into the transfer portal this offseason, and he has ended up with Mississippi State. So in week 4, Missouri will see Marquis Johnson and the Mississippi State Bulldogs at Davis Wade Stadium, not to be confused with Wade Davis Stadium. That should definitely be built somewhere in the Kansas City area eventually, without question. But for real, when it comes to the transfer portal, and when it comes to Marquis Johnson specifically, I think Cincinnati's Caleb Goodie, I guess I should say former Cincinnati Bearcat now, Caleb Goodie, well, he is now committed to the Missouri Tigers, averaging 18 yards, just about, well, a little bit more than 18 yards per catch over 2 seasons, which I think is quite notable because, well, not only, I think skill-wise, he's certainly a speed, big play type of guy, reminds you of Johnson a little bit in those ways, but actually Goodie is a more proven commodity, I think. He's been simply put, a more productive player over the last couple seasons of college football. Of course, Marquis Johnson in 2023 had just 13 catches, but some massive ones, of course, including that famous Luke Bauer deep fake punt reception against Kentucky. Well, that season, that big 23 season, Johnson averaged 29.5 yards per catch. Well, in 24 and 25, it was 14 and then 12. Obviously, again, the last 2 seasons combined, 18 yards a catch for Caleb Goodie. That's got to be one of the best numbers in the entire country, certainly in the Power 4, I would think. So Goodie really about as, not only is this a good replacement for Johnson, I think one could argue this might even be a mild upgrade. And speaking of, well, replacements, Michigan's Elijah Dotton, D-O-T-N, apologies for not exactly knowing how to pronounce that young man's name, but the Tigers getting a visit next week, another possible Michigan Wolverine, along with the Sprague kid, by the way, from Michigan, and an all Big Ten type of guard. The Chip Lindsey, the new offensive coordinator from Missouri, who came from just 1 season with the Wolverines, well, already maybe paying some dividends. The Tigers in on at least 3 different Wolverines that I can think of off the top of my head. And by the way, when I say things like the Sprague kid in this episode, please forgive me if it seems like I'm not firing on all cylinders right now. It's because I'm not. I've had like 1 or 2 hours of sleep. It was a challenging travel day for your host here. And you know what? I'm going to endeavor to persevere anyway. But again, Michigan's Elijah Dotton, again, I think he's looking like a possible Dalen Carnell replacement, as Missouri is, I believe, looking at him at the star position. And speaking of my brain not firing on all cylinders, after talking about the Missouri-Florida basketball game, well, one thing that didn't occur to me is that Annor Boateng didn't play in the ball game. I got to be honest, I completely forgot about him, and I apologize for that. But what was the deal? Was he injured? Was that a do-not-play coach's decision? Because if it's the latter, well, that's a little bit concerning that Boat can't even get on the court at this point. On the other hand, Dennis Gates can sometimes be famously a little bit lacking in information on the injury front. Again, I'm genuinely asking. I was obviously on vacation for the last few days, for those of you who follow my social media, and obviously put up with the less than ideal audio conditions on the full shows these past few days. But if I missed something, genuinely, I apologize. Let me know. But I don't know what the deal was with Annor Boateng not playing in the last game, which makes me think it was mostly probably just about ineffectiveness. DNP coach's decision? Y'all tell me. And since I'm on the topic of Missouri hoops, well, as I said before the season even started, well, this is going to be the last game of what I thought was pretty clearly the toughest 3-game stretch for Missouri basketball all season. And obviously bragging rights looked every bit of it, as the Tigers were humiliated 91-48 in that basketball game. But really a pretty incredible turnaround by the Tigers, obviously getting Jaden Stone and Trent Pierce back on the court was paramount for the Tigers. And as I said a couple episodes ago, I believe, just the fact that Missouri was able to beat Florida without shooting the lights out, I mean, that in itself was impressive. Again, obviously Stone and Pierce made a big difference. Pierce in particular made some big shots down the stretch. Stone got off to a quick start, which helped Missouri get off to a relatively fast start. And it just feels like Missouri has a real chance here to keep this season, well, more than alive. If Missouri could somehow beat Kentucky in Lexington, I mean, my goodness, then it's almost like, well, the bragging rights game, I'm not going to say it didn't count, but you've almost offset it a little bit. So Missouri really does have an opportunity here after that Florida upset to suddenly, well, turn some heads in the SEC by starting off 2-0. Do I think that's going to happen, though? Well, that's another matter. Missouri's probably going to have to, again, score at least, I would say, 80, 85 to win this basketball game. Mark Pope can typically coach up a pretty good offensive basketball team, and I think that'll be the case here. By the way, Jaden Quaintance is somebody I've talked a lot about over the years, as Missouri was interested in him in high school, then in the portal after he left Arizona State. Well, Quaintance has ended up in Kentucky and really hasn't played very much basketball this season, although he has played the previous 3 games. So it does look like Missouri will get a decent look at a guy that they've had a lot of contact with over the years. Certainly somebody Dennis Gates and his staff knows pretty well personally. So that'll be interesting to see what he looks like in year 2 of his college basketball career. And if you're just looking at Kentucky right now, they are 9-5. Missouri does have a better record than the Wildcats at 11-3, but you look at who Kentucky has played, and it's quite a bit different. All 5 losses, at least to KenPom. These are top 30 programs in Louisville, Michigan State, North Carolina, Gonzaga, and Alabama. I think those 5 names pretty much speak for themselves. So Missouri will have its work cut out for them on Wednesday night. But you know what? After seeing how the Tigers were able to score with, again, Stone and Pierce back, maybe the Tigers can open it up enough again and look like the elite kind of offensive team that they were looking like early in the season before Stone went down with injury. And as I said before, Marquis Johnson ends up at Mississippi State. Well, there's several other Missouri players that have ended up at some interesting Power 4 schools as well. And also former LSU offensive lineman Carius Kern. Is he going to be going to the Missouri Tigers? Well, it sure doesn't look like it anymore. So some more portal updates coming up for you right after these quick words. So obviously it's not all good news in the portal. LSU offensive lineman Carius Kern was expected to visit Missouri, but, well, as we've seen, a lot of these announced visits, they're very much up in the air because it's usually better to be on the early end of the visits because after the first visit or two, well, a lot of these guys get an offer that they feel like is too good to turn down, for example. And that probably is what happened when Ole Miss, well, they decided to get Carius Kern. And it seems like there's a lot of big money people at Ole Miss right now who want to show Lane Kiffin who really is boss. And they're very motivated, well, to keep the train running with whether it's the Lane train or it's the Pete Golding train as it is now. They want to keep it on the tracks. That is for certain. So good for Ole Miss, quite honestly. I'd rather see them continue to be competitive than all of the old guards of the SEC. And by the way, for all the talk of obviously the SEC's had a pretty poor showing in bowl season this year. And hey, if you want to say that the Big Ten is clearly the better conference this season, I'm not even going to attempt to argue with you at this point. But here's my main point. As a Missouri fan, as somebody who was a longtime college football fan before the Tigers got to the SEC, while I'm happy to be here, I don't actually give a crap if the SEC is the top conference or not. It's always going to be one of the good conferences, right? At the very least, it's probably going to be one or two realistically for the foreseeable future. But if the Big Ten is slightly better than the SEC overall, but for example, I don't know, Missouri wins the SEC, am I supposed to be incredibly upset about that? Because as far as I can tell, yes, flags fly forever. And by the way, some more names here that have former Missouri Tigers who have entered the transfer portal have found homes already, including former Missouri running back Marquis Davis heading to Louisville. It looks like as long as Isaac Brown, who was a freshman All-American last season, I think he's returning for the Cardinals, so that'd be a heck of a combination there potentially. I thought Marquis Davis, by the way, just showed a ton of potential and limited action for the Tigers. Keaton Jones going to Kansas State, a young man who has tons of physical ability. We'll see if he gets developed in Kansas State, or maybe he's just one of these guys who's content to transfer around every year and get the most money while he can. Hard to blame guys in those cases for trying to maximize their short-term value. You just sometimes wonder, is that at the expense of the long-term value? There's obviously got to be some balance there. By the way, Josh Manning also reportedly visiting South Carolina. This per Gabe DeArmond over at Power Mizzou. So Manning and Missouri could potentially be reuniting if he goes to South Carolina and plays with Lenoris Sellers next season. And speaking of Sellers, I guess sort of, well, a little bit, just speaking of quarterbacks, let's put it that way. The thing is, there was a few days ago, I think there were some Missouri fans who were concerned that, hey, compared to maybe some other teams, well, it was a little bit of a slow start for Missouri in the portal. I think the last couple days here have quieted those talks a little bit, especially with Robert Woodyard, the guy I led the show with, the Auburn linebacker, and Jahlil Florence, too, the Oregon cornerback. Those are two positions of need on the defense from real prominent programs, and Missouri was able to seal on them there. And obviously, to me, Austin Simmons, the fact that Missouri got the quarterback they wanted early. To me, that's probably the biggest news there, because I would have been more concerned if we're waiting. Hey, we're a week and a half, 2 weeks into this process, and Missouri was still looking for a quarterback. Well, then I would be concerned. The other positions, though, I think they tend to settle out a little bit more slowly than the quarterback. So while certainly you'll have guys like the aforementioned players I just mentioned that will sign fairly early, you're still going to have some really prominent players, even at quarterbacks, just less so. But at other positions, again, the quarterbacks kind of set the market, and then everybody follows. So I think that's what we're seeing start to trickle out here over the next few days and weeks. And again, hey, thanks for all of you everydayers, by the way, for being patient the last few days as my schedule's been a little all over the place. And obviously the audio quality needs to be better when I'm on the road. I need a better rig. I didn't like that. The echoey feedback I was getting on those shows. So they were listenable, don't get me wrong, but apologies for that. We'll try to get it better. And by the way, if you want to check out the Everydayer Club, hey, $5 a month, $50 a year, ad-free shows. You can get into our Discord, chop it up with all the Locked On hosts, including me. Yeah, check it out at lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer, or click on the link in the description of this podcast. And now that I'm back stateside, I'm ready to get back in the rhythm of things, talk about the portal, well, basically 24/7. Let's do it right here on Locked On Mizzou for the rest of the week.